quick, and then I'll introduce Gregory real quick. All right. So thank you so much for sharing all of this, what we have discussed so far. So our first speaker is Gregory LeBlanc, who's a lecturer at Berkeley, Stanford, HEC, and host of the Unsiloed podcast. Gregory has been teaching at the Haas School of Business and Berkeley Law since 2005. His research interests lie at the intersection of law, finance, and psychology in the areas of business strategy and risk management. He has been the recipient of numerous teaching awards at Berkeley, including the Earl F. Sheed Award of Outstanding Teaching 2009 and the Haas EWMBA Core Graduate Instructor of the Year in 2004-2005. Prior to his tenure at UC Berkeley, he held teaching positions at Wharton, Duke, and the University of Virginia. He has also worked outside of academia in the areas of competitive intelligence, litigation consulting, and advising consulting teams in finance, marketing, and strategy. Gregory received his Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science degrees from the University of Pennsylvania before pursuing further graduate studies there as University Scholar and Graduate Fellow. He later earned a JD from George Mason University and LLM from the Berkeley Law. So without further delay, Gregory, off to you. Next hour
that was
is
a
yours.
long-winded introduction there. I got to cut that bio. No, here's me. I'm at Berkeley. I'm also at some other school. Here's Stanford. Here's some companies. Here's the podcast. Check it out. There we go. All right, let's jump right in. And I should mention that I do teach an entire course on fintech at Berkeley and also at Stanford. And I teach a whole course on data science and data strategy. I teach another course on digital transformation. I got a lot of financial folks in that class. And so, I'm going to kind of draw a little bit on all three of those, but I'm going to focus on the data piece, right? Because that really is so central to everything that you do in today's business. And when I talk about data, I always go back to this kind of seminal story, right? And this story relates to this guy right here. He is a neighbor of mine. He runs the local baseball franchise. And I know you Italians, you want to talk about soccer all day long. I get it. Right?
Football.
Well, that's what we call it, soccer over here in America. Football is something else, right, for us. But anyway, this guy, baseball, I know you don't know anything about it, but it doesn't matter because this guy fundamentally transformed the sport of baseball, which had an impact. It spilled over into pretty much every other sport, including football, right? And now it's spilled over into pretty much every single business. Now, I'm not going to say that he was the one that made this happen, but it was accelerated by the popularization of what he did through this book and this movie, Moneyball, which I highly recommend everyone check out. Now, what did he do? Why is it so important? Within his organization, he made it clear from day one. He made it clear that every single decision in that organization had to be supported by data, science, and evidence. No more gut, no more intuition, and no more experience. Now, this is kind of revolutionary, right? Because the way business typically operates is that you defer to the people who have the wisdom. You defer to the people who have the most experience. You defer to the people who have been around the block. Billy Beane came in and said, I don't care how much experience you have, right? You can come in here with no experience. And if you have data and evidence and science, I'm going to defer to you. And so all of these old people, right? All of these old people on the left were replaced by young people who understood statistics. In fact, one of the people who became his number two was someone who he was from the Philippines. He had no idea what baseball was till he came to America and got a PhD in economics here at Berkeley, right? So just to give you an example of how he did this transformation, he began, by the way, with HR. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about HR, but it's not that different, right? Hiring customers versus hiring employees, because that's really what you're doing when you're in the marketing function, is you're hiring customers, okay? And so there's a great scene in this movie where they're contemplating this new player, right? They're contemplating this new player. And someone speaks up and says, it's like an HR committee meeting. And someone speaks up and says, oh, I think this player is got to be a bad player because he has an ugly girlfriend. Ugly girlfriend means no confidence. No confidence means can't play. Okay, and then there's some conversation around the room about whether or not this is a valid hypothesis. What do you think? Is this a valid hypothesis? Is this true? Ugly girlfriend means bad athlete?
Not necessarily.
Well, I'm glad you said not necessarily. Some people will react very viscerally to this, and you're like, "That's stupid. No way." Others are like, "Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense, right?" Turns out we don't know because no one has actually collected those two columns of data and juxtaposed them one against the other, right? There's never been any attempt to confirm or refute this hypothesis in a systematic way. So what people do at these decision-making meetings is they basically surface a bunch of hypotheses, and then they whip out some anecdotal evidence. So they might, look at someone like Savino and say, "That's Savino. He looks just like some guy that I hired 20 years ago, turned out to be awesome. Now, that other guy over there, he looks like somebody we hired in the 90s. That guy turned out to be terrible." So what they're doing is they're doing pattern recognition, but they're using this carbon-based processor in their heads, right, to do the pattern recognition. And we've learned that, this is not necessarily our strong suit, right? We don't have the capacity to compute in a systematic way. We don't have the capacity to learn in a systematic way. We're subject to confirmation biases, right? Where the evidence that supports our hypothesis, we tend to highlight, and the evidence that goes contrary to our hypothesis gets pushed under the rug, okay? And so by moving from, right, anecdote to data, what Billy Beane was able to do was to generate what I call HR alpha. Okay, now those of you who've had some finance in your background, you understand the difference between alpha and beta, right? So in the finance context, if you're trying to evaluate a portfolio manager, right? What you've got is, when you're evaluating a portfolio manager, if they beat the S&P 500, for instance, here in the United States, this could be due to skill or it could be due to something else. So if all they did was add risk into the portfolio and their returns go up, well, you don't need to pay anybody like a huge salary for that, because anybody could do that. You can use 6 lines of code to ramp up the risk, right? So what you want to do is you want to control for risk and then see if there's still some kind of outperformance that the manager generated. Now, in the world of, right, sports, right, if you want to win games in La Liga, right, all you got to do is get yourself a big, huge budget, right? So like, AC Milan, they've got a big budget. So they can go and hire Ronaldo. They can go and hire, Salah if they want. They can go and hire Messi if they wanted to, right? Well, maybe Messi won't work for them. I don't know. You can go and hire, you have a huge amount of money. You can go hire whoever you want. Doesn't take a genius, right? So here on this chart here, you can see that the New York Yankees, they're like the AC Milan of the baseball, right? They win a lot of games, but that's because they spent a lot of money. Okay. Oakland, however, wins as many games as New York, but with very little salary. I mean, this is like Lecce coming in and like competing head to head against Milan, right? That would that would be pretty impressive, And so the way to evaluate performance is not, by final performance, but basically by the gap between predicted and actual performance. Okay, now my argument is that you can find, right, alpha in every part of your organization. You can find marketing alpha, HR alpha, operations alpha, risk management alpha, accounting alpha, finance alpha, right? Supply chain alpha. Those are all just waiting to be discovered through the use of analytics. And that's why we talk about the Moneyball of media, Moneyball of teaching, Moneyball of athletics, and then of course, Moneyball of finance. Okay, now just to make sure we're all on the same page, I don't think the Silicon Valley Innovation Council folks didn't tell me what your backgrounds are. I mean, are any of you data scientists? Any of you?
Not exactly, but I'm coming from, an artificial intelligence company working on unstructured data and natural language understanding. So,
okay, so this will be music to your ears, because
yeah,
I'm going to make the case that like you don't need to be a data scientist to understand data science. I teach these courses where we do data science in a couple days, couple hours, because there's no code, low code solutions for just basic decision making. But in reality, you're going to have a team of data scientists, but you need to be able to supervise them. You need to be able to kind of, ask them questions. If you let the data scientists run the show, you're going to wind up with some stupid decision making. So you do need to have this interplay of managerial expertise, domain expertise, along with the data scientists. But basically all they're doing, if you've ever used a spreadsheet, then you've done data science, right? Because all you need, at least initially for most decisions, is some kind of structured data. You just need some rows and you need some columns. Okay, so here's an example of a bank that's trying to figure out, right, whether or not to lend money to someone. So they go back and they look at all the people that they've loaned money to in the past, organize them into rows. So each customer is a row, and then you have these columns. Now, the target feature, the thing you're interested in is like, did they default? Okay, did they pay all their loans back? Okay, that's going to be the final column in this database. And then you put every single thing that you know about this customer, at least everything that you know that could be measured at the time of decision, and you throw it in there. Okay, and then what you're trying to do is figure out like what makes the defaulters different from the non-defaulters, so that when a new individual comes in and applies for a loan, you can classify them as future defaulter, future non-defaulter, and then base your decision on that classification. Okay, so all we're doing basically is, right, training and scoring. And if you understand the mechanics of training and scoring and think what you need in order to do the training and scoring, then you're well on your way to making your organization data-driven. So by training, what we mean is you take a model, like call it a decision tree or, logistic regression, nearest neighbor, whatever. And, without data, it's nothing. When you start feeding it data, then it starts taking on a form which enables you to score. So credit score is the classic example where you rank order people from most likely to repay their loans to least likely to repay their loans based on these characteristics. And the model tells you which characteristics matter and which one don't matter. Now, the beauty of this is that a lot of the things that you subjectively think matter don't matter. And a lot of things that you subjectively think don't matter do matter, right? And that's the discovery process, the data-driven discovery process where, the patterns in the data start to emerge. And it's a beautiful thing when you watch it happen, because all you're trying to do is come up with some classification boundary between, say, the defaulters and the non-defaulters, okay? Okay, and this is a logistic regression right here. So that's a decision tree, that's a logistic regression. Notice what we're doing here. This is a super simple model with only two predictive features, is that, one model slices the data using like zigzags and one slices the data using diagonals. So what the data scientists are doing is they're just trying out all these different slicing methods to figure out which slicing method works best, right? And of course, the objective has to be a business objective. Data scientists don't understand business objectives typically. They understand statistical objectives. So for instance, they'll come back to you and say, hey, we've come up with this model. It's the most accurate model. It's amazing. It's super accurate. And you're like, great. I'm not paying you to give me an accurate model. I'm paying you to give me a profitable model. Now you're wondering, well, what's the big difference here? Well, when we think in terms of accuracy, and like, how can you knock accuracy? Right? Accuracy is what these guys are trained to do. I'm sure Pamela understands this, because inaccuracy can come in two forms. You can have, at least in a classifier, you can have a false positive or a false negative. Now, these are very, very different things. Think back to, let's go back to, Lombardy 2020, right? You're in the town of Vaux and they come in and they give you a COVID test. All right. Well, that COVID test could make two types of mistakes. It could tell you have COVID when you don't, or it could tell you don't have COVID when you do. Now, should we treat both of those equally? Or should we say, you know what? Certain types of errors are kind of more important than other types of errors. And if we don't weight those errors appropriately, then we're going to be pursuing the wrong objective. So for instance, if you think about an Ebola test, the most accurate Ebola test on the planet is the one that says negative to everybody, right? That's like the most. There was this bomb detector that they sold in Iraq for $80,000 a piece that they would use at the roadside, right, at the checkpoints, and it was just a box with a stick in it, and they sold it for $80,000, and it was super, super accurate because it basically said, no, there's no bomb in this car. There's only one bomb in every 100,000 cars, so it was only wrong 1 out of 100,000 times, right? Super, super accurate. But of course, those errors were very, very costly. Okay. So, if we look at fraud, here's an example of fraud. If we look at the training data and we see that the blue dots are kind of, legit transactions and the red squares are illegitimate transactions. Well, where should we draw the line here? Where should we create a boundary? We've got two options, right? We could do it at the blue line or we could do it at the green line. Now, if you hire a bunch of data scientists and say, go get me the best model that predicts fraud, they're actually going to pick the blue line because the blue line only has two errors. But in your gut, right? Like, wait, hold on a second. That's not what I want. Like, I want to catch the fraud here. So I need the green line. Now, notice that the green line has 4 errors. It has 4 false positives as opposed to 2 false negatives. But we know that a fraud can cost us millions of dollars, whereas a service interruption for an individual customer, their CLV might go down, they might churn, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's going to be much cheaper for somebody to have their credit card, not work than to allow someone to kind of start, siphoning off cash from somebody's account. Okay, so again, without the business people and the data scientists working closely together, you're not going to wind up with a data-driven organization. So this is the final slide. I could end right here. I've gone from the first slide to the last slide of my 2-unit data strategy class that I offer at Berkeley, and you guys just boom, you just whizzed right through it. This summarizes in a nutshell what data science can do for you. Okay, so this is from marketing. Imagine you've got a database of customers, right? Leads, right? You got all these people that you could potentially advertise to. And up here in the upper right-hand corner, what we have is we have the cost benefit matrix, okay? And what this says is that if I advertise to someone who turns out to be a legit customer, who's going to convert, I'm going to make a $4 profit from that lead. If, however, I advertise and send a customer service rep out to talk to this person and they turn out to be a false lead, then I lose $5. Okay. Now, based on that, you can calculate how high does the probability of success have to be to justify this marketing effort, right? It's got to be like 66% or something like that, right? It's got to be, or is it 55%? It's got to be like 55%. Like if it's just 50-50, I'm going to lose money. Now, let's suppose that within our population, we have a 50% conversion rate. Well, if we have a 50% conversion rate and we need to have a 55%, then what's going to happen is the more people we advertise to, the more money we lose. So this diagonal line refers to how many people do we advertise to? And what this model is telling us is that don't advertise to anybody. It's just a waste of money. But if we can go through the customer database and we can rank order people from the most likely to convert down to the least likely to convert, the ones that have a 90% probability of converting down to the ones that have a 10% probability of converting. If we can, right, if we can take this big undifferentiated mass of customers and classify them into, really good potential customers, really, dead ends, then we can start with the low-hanging fruit, as we say in English. Do they have that phrase in Italian? Low-hanging fruit? They must, right? If you can start with the low-hanging fruit and work your way up the tree, then you can actually make quite a bit of money as long as you stop advertising at this point, right? So, you advertise to the top 45% and then you stop. Okay, so each one of these dotted lines corresponds to a different classifier. One could be a decision tree, one could be, a random forest, one could be a whatever. Then you want to pick the one that does the best job of predicting without a sample, okay? This summarizes everything you need to know about data science. It's just taking, right, an undifferentiated mass of potential customers, potential employees, and then, sorting them into better and worse. So I'll give you an example of some companies that have done this. So here's a company called Capital One. How many of you have heard of Capital One? I mean, it is the #1 credit card issuer on the planet. Okay, #1 credit card issuer on the planet. What most people don't realize is that this company started off as Signet Bank. Now, nobody's heard of Signet Bank. They were the 350th largest bank in the United States. Now remember, this is all pre-internet, this is pre-everything, but they went from the 350th largest bank to the #1 largest credit card issuer in the world. Now, how did they do it? Data science. They did it with data science, okay? And the way they did it, it's such an amazing story. What they did is they looked out there and they saw that every single credit card company in the United States was using the same credit scoring model, the FICO model that you guys probably all heard about. So what that meant was that every single applicant got the same result, regardless of which bank they applied to. So if you were above, like a 700, you got like 50 credit cards. And if you were below 700, you got like 0 credit cards. So what Capital One said is, hey, we think that in that undifferentiated mass of people with, lower credit scores, there's going to be some gems. There's going to be some folks that are really profitable. Okay. The question is, how do we find them? How do we find them? Right? What we'd like to do is we'd like to apply some of this data science. The problem is we don't have any data. Like if you don't lend people money, then you can't know if they're any good. So what they did was they just sprayed these credit cards. Okay, they just sprayed them out there to a couple 100,000 of these customers who were denied credit by other financial institutions. And what do you suppose happened? What happened was they lost a ton of money because these people weren't any good, right? Of course, right? They're just terrible credit. So they lost a ton of money. And so as the months went by and the red ink started piling up and they're losing more and more money, right? The shareholders are like, what the hell are you doing? The Wall Street was like, what the heck's going on? What's wrong with you people? You're not supposed to lend money to the people who have bad credit. But after about 9 months, okay, in addition to having all this red ink, now they have a database, right? Because, some of these people, a small subset of these people turned out to be great customers, right? And so now at the end of 9 months, you can cancel the card for the people who are bad, but then you can dig into the data and figure out what made those good customers different. And now going forward, let's just lend to them. Okay, now, if you're an accountant, and if you are, I'm sorry, I feel bad for you. Okay, it's all right. Somebody's got to do the dirty work. But if you're an accountant, you probably look at this and you think, okay, loan loss, right? Let's put that in the loan loss column. But I look at it and I see R&D, because those losses, right? That's your necessary data acquisition cost, which you can amortize for the next 50 years. Because now you, Capital One, are the only financial institution in the United States that has this proprietary database. And if anybody else wants it, they're going to have to go and do the same thing that you just did. But they might find that you got there first. And so those people who are good, they already have credit cards. So you're not going to be able to pry them away from them. That's exactly what happened with Capital One. Okay. So this lesson, I think everyone needs to understand this lesson that, to do training and scoring, you need training data. Without training data, you got nothing. Okay. Okay. Let me give you an example from my life. I helped start this company back in 2007, which tried to solve the problem that we all know, which is call center employment. Call centers have very, very high turnover, very high churn. The employees typically work about 6 months before they quit. Okay. So that means that, you spend all this money recruiting, you spend all this money training, and then boom, they quit after 6 months. So my friends decided, hey, if we could get people to stay on the job 12 months instead of 6 months. And remember, this is for credit card companies, for wireless telecommunication companies, cable TV companies, right? Hospitals, whatever. If we can get them to stay on the job for 12 months instead of 6 months, we can double the ROI on our recruitment and our training and so forth. So how do you do it? Well, you brainstorm, you're like, well, we got to pay them more money. Oh, we got to put some, natural light in the room. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, what they said is, nah, let's just figure out, right, what makes the 2-year employees different from the 3-month employees. right? Because you have all this variety. Some people stay on the job 2 years, some people stay on the job a month. Let's just comb through the HR database of these big companies. Just take a look at what features of the employee, which are identifiable at the point of hire, predict, right, longevity. And then just hire those people, right? It's so genius. Like no one ever thought to do this because the HR data was collected for compliance reasons. It was never kind of collected for, recruiting reasons. But once you look at the data, you start to notice all of these patterns. And the patterns are very different from what people think. So, we went to India and we talked to this guy who was the head of HR for the largest call center in India. And he was like, I don't like to hire young women because they get married and they quit. So we looked at his data and it said the opposite. The young men quit at a higher rate than the young women. So we showed him the data and he was like, you don't understand India. Get out of my office. Okay, so that company, right, they sold their call center because they were losing so much money. Okay, I hope that jackass got fired, right? Because he never let the data get in the way of his prejudices. Now, on the other hand, we went to a big a cell phone company here in California, and we showed them that prisoners, criminals, make really good employees. People fresh out of prison. And this guy's like, where can I get some prisoners? Right? And he set up this prison recruitment. Like let's meet them at the gate and take them on down to the call center. Now that is the kind of company that's going to survive and thrive in the modern world because they don't have any preconceived notions. Just like, hey, whatever the data tells me, I'm going to follow it, right? Okay, so lots of insights here. My favorite insight from the data was that one of the most important predictors of quality employee is not years of education, not prior work experience, not general intelligence, but what browser do you use when you apply for the job? Can you guess? Remember, this is like 10 years ago. Can you guess which browser is used by the worst employees? Right? Before the person even fills out their name on the form, you know whether they're going to be a good employee. The minute they go to your website, they know, as soon as they open the website, you're like, nah, don't hire this person. Do you know which browser it is? Can you guess? Internet Explorer, right? Don't hire those people, right? Now, of course, I don't think it exists anymore. It's now something like Edge or something, but those people are the worst. You don't want to hire them. Think about this, right? You can get 15% longer tenure for your employees just by hiring like Chrome users. Okay, now this pattern's basically disappeared over the years, but like, this is so cool. This is so cool. This is just letting the data talk. Now, why? Why do they do better? Who cares? It's not your problem. Let some academic write a paper about it. It's not your problem. If it works, it works. Just do it. Go for it, right? Okay. And what's crazy about this insight is that no one, there wasn't a single HR person that we talked to who suggested, well, let's take a look at their browser. No, this was a piece of metadata that was just accidentally left in the training set, which popped out by accident because it's just part of, every time somebody goes on the website, you got to configure the website to satisfy the browser expectations. So anyway, this concept, of course, has been imported into finance. And so when we look at all these fintech startups in the lending space, it's all about using data that the banks aren't using, right? So whether we're talking about something like an Earnest or a SoFi, right? All these, Affirm, right? On Deck, they're all using, right, different data. In fact, one of my students started a credit card company. She quit her program and started a credit card. I invested with her. That was 2 years ago. She started the credit card. She now has 2 million applications. And her basic model is don't look at the credit score. Don't even look at the credit score. What they do, she uses Plaid to tap into their bank balance. And whenever their bank balance drops down below a certain threshold, she just cuts off the credit. That's it. It's so simple. Like, you owe me money? No credit. You got credit? Okay. So because she's targeting immigrants who come to the US, right, to work and study, who don't have a credit history in the US, but they come from, they have good income. I mean, she's Korean. So she came to America. She paid for her college tuition with cash, bought a car with cash, paid her rent with cash because that's all she could do, but she obviously had a lot of cash, couldn't get a credit card. Can you believe it? So she basically created a solution to this problem. And now, she's doing Series B. It's great. I'm super excited because I invested and I'm an advisor, and it's going to pay for my new, wing of my house. I mean, this is great stuff. Okay. And she's only like 30, right? So these new lenders, they're looking for alternative data. So for instance, I had the CEO of a firm come and speak in my class, the founder, not a firm, Ernest. And this guy went to Harvard Business School. And when he applied for a car loan coming out of Harvard Business School, he was denied. Now think about that. Look, if you're going to lend money to somebody, you can't do much better than a Harvard Business School grad, right? I mean, these guys are going to make money no matter what. And yet he was denied. So his idea was, why not allow people to upload their LinkedIn profiles as part of the application process? Because what you care about is people's future income, not their prior credit history, right? Why didn't anybody think of this? This is data that just is sitting there. It's just lying around. Nobody's using it. It's crazy, okay? Now, if we move down to the unbanked, this is a company called Tala. It's based here in Southern California, operates in Philippines, Kenya, Mexico, a whole bunch of these other places. Now, these guys, their goal is to give credit to people who have no credit history, but also no employment history. No history whatsoever. There are people in Africa that have like nothing, no paper existence. Right now, I know in India you got Aadhaar and some other stuff, but look, there are parts of Philippines, Mexico, where just you got nothing, got no. Everything's cash. Okay, you get paid in cash, you pay in cash. There's no credit history, no nothing, no paper trail that you can look at. So how would you develop a credit scoring model for people when there's no data whatsoever about these people? What would you do? Any ideas?
Just through the phones, I don't know, somehow.
Well, so remember, you need some training data. You got to start collecting some training data, and you got to start making some loans. And then when you make the loans, some people pay, some people don't pay, and then you can sort them out. But how are you going to collect data? Right? Because you don't just want to collect the target feature, which is, oh, this guy repaid, this guy didn't repay. You need to understand, well, what is it about that person? So if you want to know a lot about somebody, I can learn more about you in 1 microsecond on your phone than I could have learned about you 20 years ago through hundreds of hours of research.
Pamela, you have a idea? I saw you came off mute.
So what happens is you get the customer to download the app, right? And then you give permission, you get them to give you permission so that you can just kind of scrape the whole phone, right? So what you do is you just go, you search around, like what apps they have on their phone, or what contacts do they have on their phone? What do they do on the phone all day, right? Are they playing Angry Birds, or are they, what are they doing? Right? You can monitor what's happening on the phone, right? You can just sort of search around and see what's going on, particularly if it's an Android phone. If it's an Apple phone, it's a little bit harder. Even an Android phone, which is what most of the developing world uses, you can sort around, whatever. And then, of course, you can start collecting ongoing data. And some of the most valuable data that you can look at is, right, location data. Location data is incredibly informative. So this is actually one day in the life of a San Francisco resident, Berkeley resident. It's actually me. Okay, story. This is me. This is one day in my life. All right, pre-pandemic. Okay, it's a little bit less exciting since the pandemic, but pre-pandemic is a typical day in my life where I like get up in the morning, and first of all, before I've even gotten up in the morning, if you have location data, you know where someone sleeps. If I know where you sleep, boom. I mean, are you sleeping under a bridge? Or are you sleeping in a $3 million house? Like, where are you sleeping? If I know where you're sleeping, boom, I already know like a lot about you, right? I can geolocate your bed. Man, that's a lot. Okay. So I know where this person's sleeping, and then they're driving. Now, I know whether they're driving or not. I can tell whether they're in the back seat or the front seat just by the movement, right? And how they use the phone. And I can tell how fast they're driving. Are they driving fast? Are they driving slow? Are they driving like an idiot? Okay. This person does a detour because of traffic jam. Oh, that's a valuable piece of information. Some people, detour around traffic jams. Some people don't. Maybe that's predictive of repayment. Okay, then I see they spend the morning at LinkedIn headquarters, lunch at Google headquarters, and then afternoon at Facebook headquarters. Okay, what do you think? If you didn't know anything else about this person, would you lend them money? Maybe you're not so sure. You're like, well, are they in the parking lot? What are they doing? Are they in the building? Okay, well, we know they're in the building. We know they're in conference room 19. We know they're in conference room 19 with the head of their, fintech division. Oh, well, that tells us something. Maybe this person's a pretty good, person to lend to. And then around 4 p.m., this person leaves Facebook and goes to a wine store. Uh-oh. Oh, man. Not so good. I don't know. What do you think? Wine drinker. Okay, we got to comb through the database and see what we know about wine drinkers. My guess is, are they better than beer drinkers? What do you think?
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
yeah, for sure.
Well, maybe it depends on what they're drinking. Is it Barolo? Is it Negro Amaro? Is it Fiano? What are they drinking here? Maybe we need to know what they're drinking. We can figure out what aisle they're in. Are they in the Italian aisle? Maybe not so good. I don't know. Well, let's figure out what aisle they're in. Okay, so anyway, they get back in their car, and then they head on up to the Opera House. Spend 4 hours in the Opera House. Okay, now, what do you think? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, if it's Verdi, give him a loan. Wagner, forget it. Don't give him a loan, right? That's what you're thinking. Well, we could actually, put that in there as a feature in our model. Okay. And then, of course, then they head back and, they go back to the office, spend a few hours in the office after the opera to work on their slides. Now that tells me so much more than, past 20 years of credit history. I mean, it's amazing, right? And we can get this just by getting the customer to download our app and give us permission. Okay. It's pretty remarkable. So location data is huge. I love this. This is called Striver. Okay. So you can look at somebody's Striver account and see how much they exercise. Or if you're the Afghan Taliban, you can use this to figure out where the US Army base is and bomb it, right? This is so stupid. Can you imagine? Like, why would they let the soldiers use it's not Striver. What's this application called? It's Strava. Yeah, Strava. Okay. So look, when we think about insurance, the insurance industry is being completely upended right now because look, insurance is all about measuring risk. Okay. It's all about measuring risk. It's all about taking averages and differentiating those averages, right? So we know that, every day, 1 in 1,000 car drivers are going to be in a crash. Okay. The question is which one? And ideally, we want to insure the people that aren't in the crashes and let somebody else insure the ones who are in the crashes. So how do we know who's going to be in a crash? Well, we've got the asymmetric information problem, we've got the adverse selection problem, which we all talk about. The way to overcome that is with better information. So the way in which auto insurance works is pretty crazy because what they do is they say, well, let's take a look at your driving history. We'll look at your age, we'll look at your gender. Now look, age and gender are important for sure. If you have a young teenage boy, that's probably not the best insurance risk right there. Okay, it's important. But there are some young boys that actually drive pretty well. And there's some old ladies that don't drive so well. So we don't want to do that crude stuff. And I don't have time to get into Netflix, but Netflix, what made Netflix so profitable was the discovery that not all young women like romantic comedies and not all young men like sports movies, right? You can distill that segmentation down to one, right? Instead of using these crude categories like the movie studios. Same thing with insurance. Okay. So what we'd like to know is We don't want to know your prior driving history because look, crappy drivers sometimes aren't in accidents and good drivers sometimes are in accidents. That data is very, very sparse. Similarly, did they get pulled over by a cop? Okay, that's probably more luck than anything else, right? That's probably luck more than anything else. In fact, every time if I hit somebody with my car in the parking lot, I usually just give them cash because I don't want my insurance company knowing, right? So one way around this is telematics. So every truck in America is connected through telematics. Every single commercial truck in America is connected through telematics, right? We know where the truck is, how fast the truck's going, is the truck driver doing a good job, bad job? Are they sleeping? Are they paying attention to the road? Okay, now telematics can basically just suck data from the engine, or if you have, for instance, cameras, forward-facing cameras, internal-facing cameras, you can add that data into the mix and get really, really good picture of how they're driving. And you can do this to price insurance, not just to basically cover your risks, but also to influence behavior, because the customer can look at their prices and figure out what they're doing right and wrong. So if you are a commercial operator of trucks, you can say, okay, I need to invest in this safety technology or whatever. Okay, so the simplest version of this is Metromile, Lemonade. These are some other companies in the US where they will just track, how many miles you drive. Okay. But if you can go one step further and track the quality of the driving, in fact, it's becoming so powerful that in the state of California, we've passed laws that limit the insurance company's ability to use this data because it's so powerful, right? But it's not just things like your driving behavior, but what if we can pick up on signals even earlier? So apparently there is some evidence that if you like spicy food, you take more risks. Wow, what if our auto insurance company could tap into our grocery purchases? Okay, there's a company called Discovery Health out of South Africa, which I met with 10, 15 years ago. They were doing some super innovative stuff in the healthcare where they were saying, we want to give people discounts if they exercise. Well, how do you do that? So they signed partnerships with gyms. Every time you go to the gym, you swipe your card, that data goes up to Discovery Health. We want to encourage people to eat healthy. How do we track that? Form partnership with grocery chains. Every time you buy groceries, that data goes up to the insurance company. So now the insurance company has a sense of what you eat. They have a sense of how much you exercise. They can adjust their pricing accordingly. Okay. And then they realized, hey, health costs correlate with mortality and with driving. So they went from health insurance to life insurance to auto insurance, all because they had access to better data than their competitor. So I think in the US, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in the US, people are like, oh, privacy, privacy, privacy. But most Americans are like, yeah, I'll give my data as long as I can get discounts and stuff. I'll share my data. If I exercise more, I want my insurance company to know. I want them to tap into my Apple Health data so that they know that I'm one of these people who walks. I'm not one of these people that sits around all day and watches TV. Okay, so I get these discounts. Now, the problem here, of course, is, data quality, because data quality can be gamed. So, I know a lot of French people here in the US, and maybe there's some Italians, they say French people are just Italian people in a bad mood. Have you heard that? Maybe that's too simple, but anyway, I know some French people, and what they do is, they want to get these discounted insurance policies. So they signed up for the Fitbit tracker, and they put on their dog. Okay, so they go down to the dog park, and they have the dog run around while they're smoking their gitans, right? And the dog's running around, so they get the insurance discount, right? So you need to have a little. You gotta worry about data quality. Another example is I was in Napoli a couple years ago, and I had this big like Skoda station wagon because I was in Puglia and I was driving around, and I made a huge mistake. I was in like central Napoli and I needed to get to the airport. And so I used Google Maps. Okay, big mistake, big mistake. Don't use Google Maps. Okay, so Google Maps took me down these little streets and the streets started getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And then finally, right, my car was like stuck. I couldn't go any further. The streets were too narrow, you know? And I was like, what the hell? And then behind me, I hear all these honking, like, blah, blah, blah. And everybody's yelling at me and you know, Neapolitan, whatever, you know, they can be very vocal, those folks, with their displeasure. So I'm thinking, well, wait a second. How can people be honking? Like, how can they be going through here? I turn around and of course they're all on like scooters or in these little tiny Fiats. And so what was going on here? What was Google Maps doing? Why was Google Maps sending me down this road? Well, we'll think back to, so this is what we call bias in the data, training and scoring. Google generates directions, not from maps that they buy from the city council, but from actual driving data. And in Naples, the training data is like mostly scooter data. So Google's like, yeah, here's how you go, right? But that's not how you go if you have a station wagon. If you have a big sedan, you got to go a different way. Okay, so you know what Google really needs to have is it needs to have a little switch, like, yo, I'm in a station wagon. Oh, you go that way. I'm in a scooter. Oh, you go that way. But they don't have that. Okay, so again, this is all the quality of your model is a function of the training data that you have. And so, you know, in health insurance, we're getting more and more data. This is a company that offers these connected pill boxes. So in other words, you know, one of the biggest problems in medicine, I did some work for this pharmaceutical company that makes hepatitis drugs. And the hepatitis drugs cost about $70,000 in the US, right, for a full course of these hepatitis drugs. The problem is that if you don't take the pills, it doesn't work. And then you got to spend another $70,000 on the second treatment course, right? So you really, really want to make sure people take their pills. So connected pill box basically tells you, yeah, this person opened up their pill box. Now, if they're senile and they got Alzheimer's, they might open it and then not take it. So what you really want is a connected pill. So we've actually got these connected pills. Pill goes in your stomach, sends a text to the doctor. Yep, pill swallowed, mission accomplished. Okay, so, you know, doctors, healthcare, we're getting more and more precise data to do more and more precise medicine. And even your DNA, which currently costs about $100 to do a full genomic inventory, that price will probably, I think it's going to go down to like $1. If it goes down to $1, then we could do daily genetic testing, right? When you go to the bathroom, they could test your genes to make sure you don't have cancer or something like that. So I always tell my students, like, when you go down to the insurance agent, be very careful. If they offer you a cup of coffee, they might just be trying to get a DNA sample so that they can, you know, figure out like how sick you are. So just, you know, be super careful. Now, of course, if you know you're healthy, then by all means spit all over that coffee mug so you can get your discounts. But if you don't, if you're not so sure, maybe stay away. Okay, so one of my favorite, just to keep with this fintech example, in China, they found that one of the single most important predictors of whether you would repay a loan is how you use the battery in your phone. If you let the phone go all the way down to 0, you are also the kind of person that probably wouldn't repay your loans. And if you started topping off your battery when it hit 30%, then you're probably somebody who does repay their loans. So think about that. I don't need to know your credit history. I just need to know how you manage your battery. Crazy, right? Okay. So before we wrap up, I think you've started to figure out, like, hey, without training data, I can't do anything. I need to get training data. I need a strategy for data acquisition. Now, if we go back to the Oakland A's that we started this whole story with, they had generated a competitive advantage on data, from data. Question is this a sustainable competitive advantage? Is this a sustainable competitive advantage? Because that's what we want. And the answer is no, it's not. They went right back to mediocrity soon after they started using data. Now, why is that?
Everyone else started using it.
Absolutely. Every other team was like, wait, hold on. What are they doing? And they just copied them. So the Los Angeles Dodgers came in and recruited away the data science team from Oakland, just doubled their salaries. Boom. Now Los Angeles has money and analytics. Oakland just has analytics. Boom, right back to mediocrity. Okay, so the key lesson here is that analytics is just, everyone's got analytics. I mean, if you don't have analytics, you're toast. But analytics is not enough. You need to have more data and better data than your competitor. And you need to make sure that that data supply, that data access that you have a moat around it so that while you're collecting the data, no one else can collect the data. In other words, you need proprietary first-party customer data in order to create a competitive advantage in today's world. And when I evaluate startups, I look at them and I say, okay, what proprietary data are you going to get? And if the answer is, well, we're just basing it all on public data. Get out of my office. I'm no interest. Or, well, we decided we're going to use this kind of data. Well, can anybody else? Well, yeah, if they decide they want to look, all right, get out of my office. You don't have anything, right? You've got to have a unique source of proprietary first-party customer data. Otherwise, you've got nothing. And this is why Facebook and Google, all these companies, they give away their analytics tools. They open source everything. Because Google and Facebook don't rely on proprietary analytics. They rely on proprietary data. So I'll give you a couple examples that we'll wrap up with of companies that have, figured this out. So for instance, Square. Square is a fintech in the US, right? And they came up with this idea of allowing anybody with a cell phone to convert it into a POS. So that if you're selling, merchandise on the sidewalk, some fake Louis Vuitton bags in front of the Coliseum, okay, you can start taking credit cards. Now, how does Square make money? You might think, well, they make money on the transaction fees. No. They lose money on every single transaction. How do they make money? From the data. They have a unique window into the P&L of these small businesses that allows them to do better credit evaluation than the banks. Okay. Here's another company, Kinza Thermometer. These guys have connected thermometers. Now, what's so great about that? Well, you can sort of see where people are experiencing fevers and where they're not. This is, April 2020. You can see a lot of COVID in Florida. This shows you the area around Stanford during our lockdown. Basically, fevers went to 0. So what do you do with this data? Well, you sell it to the drugstores so that they can anticipate where they need to stock up on flu medicine, right? So that they don't have stockouts. Here's a company called diapers.com. How did they make money? Can't make money shipping diapers. Tell you, shipping costs are too high. So how did they sell for $400 million to Amazon? By getting the best database of all the new mothers in America. You ship diapers for a loss. Once you have those leads, you sell them strollers, cribs, other high margin items. New York Stock Exchange, how do they make money? Not on transactions, but on data that they sell to hedge funds. Robinhood, how do they make money? 0 fees. Again, they sell the data to the hedge funds. So the point here is, right, without proprietary data, you've got nothing. I'll give you this one last example, just to show you how this works over time. One of the most important pieces of information in the world of media advertising is, what are people watching on TV? Now, in the old days, you had these Nielsen diaries, and you would use these to figure out what people were watching on TV, right? People would be a small sample, you'd have inference problems, you'd have, sampling bias, whatever. And people would write down, oh, I watched this TV show, I watched that TV show, whatever. Now, the problem is, first of all, sampling bias. The people who are doing this are not normal people. Secondly, they lie. They never tell you what they're really watching. And thirdly, their memory sucks. They don't remember what they were watching. So that's why what we'd like to do is track real-time viewing behavior. And that's where the cable TV companies came in. The cable TV companies could track actual viewing behavior and then match it with the demographic data of the people that they had as their customers, and then use that to sell information back to the advertisers so that they're advertising on the right programs. Okay, this was what made cable TV so valuable. They had this wonderful data stream that no one else had access to. Now, when you see that huge pile of money being made, you think, okay, how can I disintermediate the cable companies and ingest that data and sell it to the advertisers at a lower price than the cable companies? Who can do that? TV manufacturers. So the TV manufacturers started tracking what you're watching. And now all of a sudden, cable TV companies are worth less because they no longer have a monopoly on that data. Okay. So now all of a sudden we've got someone else who's coming in, and these guys are stealing the data. Now, the problem with this data is it tells you what's on the TV, but it doesn't tell you whether somebody's actually in front of the TV. And so these clever app developers figured out a way to spy on your viewing behavior through your phone. So your phone is spying on your viewing behavior. This is even more accurate because when you take the phone to the bathroom, they know you missed the commercial. Okay. And so this now makes the TV manufacturers less valuable because now they no longer have a unique proprietary access to that data. And then along comes Mr. Google. And now we got the Google Home, we got the Apple Alexa, and we got all the other, and Amazon and Apple, and those guys are now starting to spy on what you're watching. Okay. So the whole point here is that when the data is proprietary, you can make money. When the data becomes a commodity, you can't make money anymore. Okay. So anyway, this is all, we'll skip all this stuff.
Yeah, we're out of time. So
okay, so I'll end with one question. This is a quiz. And I asked this quiz starting about 7 years ago, and it's still valid. In the world of autonomous driving, you got Google and you got Tesla. And they're both trying to automate the driving process. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? Well, if you've been paying attention for the last hour, whoever has the best and the most data about driving. And a lot of people think, well, Google has a lot of data. Yeah, but they have search data. These little critters, these little cars, these little Waymo cars that are driving around in San Francisco. Tesla collects more data before lunch from its hundreds of thousands of cars than Waymo has collected in its entire history. It's not even close. Not even close. Tesla has won this thing. They won it 7 years ago because they have proprietary first-party training data on driving that no one else has. It's not even close. Game over. Tesla won this thing. So ask yourself, what unique proprietary data can you get access to on which you can develop algorithms that will give you a business model that's defensible against anybody else? Okay, so anyway, that's it. I'll just skip this. We can do it some other time, but please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got my data here. Let's see, let's fast forward to the last page. There we go. That's me. Feel free to connect and
awesome.
Talk soon.
Awesome, Gregory. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
All right. All right. Thanks a lot, Gregory. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
We'll see you.